Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben. I work here at Be Online Learning, and today I'm going to be taking you through result slides in Storyline 360. What they are, what they do, and some different ways that we can work with them to provide our learners with different views of the content. So basically a result slide in Articulate Storyline are much more than just ways to track course assessment, although of course they do that natively as well. When used correctly, they can also inform the learner's training journey. They can control the learner's pathway through the content. They can also reinforce key learnings. And of course, they manage detailed reporting back to a learning management system or learning record store. Okay, in this webinar, we're going to have a look at how to set up result slides correctly. We're going to discuss what is required to get your result slide working correctly with your LMS. And we can also have a look at some design options to get your result slides to stand out. So first things first, what is a result slide? Okay, result slides give the learner basically dynamic feedback at the end of quizzes and surveys. They do this by compiling the points scored and the answers registered by the learner as they progress through the quiz. Now, this data is then used to determine a pass or fail score or percentage for the learner, which in turn displays a pass or fail message on the screen. All of this detail is then saved by the course, which can then be passed back to an LMS or LRS to register the completion, whether it's successful or otherwise, of the course by the learner. Now, you can use one or multiple result slides in a Storyline 360 course and even combine those result slides together to get a composite score across an entire course. So how then do they work? Well, basically, the results slide in Storyline primarily uses number variables. Firstly, to determine whether the learner has passed or failed. And when you add the results slide to the course, Storyline will also create these variables for you, depending on the type of results slide you're using or whatever you're getting into. Okay. Now, also those variables secondarily are used to pass the information of score, percentage passed, failed back to the LMS as well. Now, the variables themselves are a pass percent and pass points, and also the score percent and score points variables are used by the results slide connected directly to the questions in the course. Okay, so pass percent and pass points equal the percentage or points you need to get in order to pass, whereas score percent and score points are the percentage or points that the learner actually achieved. So you can see basically by comparing one with the other, Storyline can determine if the learner passed or failed. So say if the score percent variable is greater than or equal to the pass percent variable. Now, if you're using a result slide that has combining the results from other result slides in your course, where the learner has to pass all of the other quizzes in order to get your final results, or to pass your final result slide, you will then get a combined passed and a combined failed and a combined total variables. Now, what these do is they track the number of quizzes that the learner has passed, the number that they have failed, and the total number of quizzes in the course. So in order to pass the overall, then the number of past quizzes, the number of quizzes that the learner has passed must equal the total number of quizzes in the overall course. Now, finally, also, when using a combined result slide, you get another variable, which is a passed variable. And that, instead of being a number variable, is a true and false variable. And quite simply there, if the variable is passed, you've passed the course, basically. And then that also is used to show layers as well, which is we're going to get into in a second. Okay, so Storyline adds all of those variables automatically when you go ahead and add your result slide. And as it's doing that, Storyline also adds different elements to the slide as well. So it shows or adds different layers, effectively a success and a failure layer, and that controls your messaging to the learner. Whether the learner has passed or failed, you can give them on-screen messaging around that. And then finally, underneath all of that, Storyline also automatically adds triggers that, firstly, compare the variables to determine pass or fail, but then also to show the appropriate layers based on whether or not the learner did actually pass or fail. Now, from that, we can extrapolate what we can do with our results slide. So at a very basic level, obviously, they inform the learner. Results slides can let the learner know how they are progressing through a course based on whether or not they're passing or failing different quizzes that they are asked to do. But they can also provide a platform for controlling the learner's pathway through the course using such items as a pre-check versus a final assessment. So a pre-check being an assessment that happens at the start of the course, and if the learner passes that assessment, then they don't have to do the rest of the course. Okay. Now, the opposite being a final assessment, which is what we're used to in most quizzes, the final assessment being an assessment that happens later on in the course or at the end of the course, and they have to pass that in order to pass the overall. There's also functions within the results slides themselves to inform or to change the learner's pathway. For example, using quiz review or retry functions. And also, because quiz results slides show those different messages based on whether the learner has passed or failed, you can use branching as well. So effectively, when you get to your results slide, you have a pass layer or a failure layer. You can set up different buttons, navigational buttons on those layers to send the learner down different pathways based on whether or not they passed the quiz or failed the quiz. Okay, and of course, the results slides are used to inform the LMS because they hold on to that quiz information, what the learner did, what answers were selected by the learner, did they pass or fail? All of that is held within the content, and then it is passed back to the LMS when the course is closed. And so it can inform what the learner has done to that LMS or learning record store as well, if you happen to have one of those. So let's go ahead now and have a look at some results slides and how they work and what they can do. And then we'll also have a look at some different design ideas around those as well. And where I wanted to start with this is basically just go to sort of results slides 101. What do you do to add a result slide and the different features and functions there? So for my first couple of demonstrations here, in fact, for most of the demonstrations, I'm using basically the same quiz. Now, the quiz design and look and feel is the same one that we use when we're running our standard Storyline training. So anyone who's been through that training, it'll be a familiar looking thing for you. But we've got a basic standard design here for a quiz. And it's got the same, pretty much the same questions throughout, just 5 questions in this quiz. Now, at the moment, we haven't got a results slide here. So we're just going to go ahead and add one in, and through that, we're going to see the different features of the results slide. So I'm going to come down to the last slide in my quiz. I am going to go up to my slides tab at the top of the screen, and I'm going to go in and add a results slide to this quiz. Now, when I add that results slide, what we can see is there's different types of results slides that I can add to Storyline based on the type of quiz that I'm running. So we have a graded results slide, survey, blank, and then combined results slide. And that combined one's one that only just really got added, I think, last month. I think it was just in August that one got added to the results slide options here. But in a nutshell, basically, we have our graded results slide. So that's tracking graded quiz questions where you score points, and therefore, at the end of the day, you want to have a pass or fail. Survey results slides track what the learner selected on the screen, but there's no points in a survey, so they don't have that same kind of pass or fail option. A blank results slide is pretty much exactly as the name suggests. It gives you the basic structures of the results slide, but then you can go in and add your own visuals and graphics and other things. There's something to be said for the other results slides that are here, is that Storyline gives you a starting point in terms of the screen design, which is what you'll see, the basic design when we go in and add these. And then finally, there is a combined results slide, which is something that we're going to have a quick look at as well as part of this webinar. And the combined results slide is where you have a course that has multiple quizzes throughout. All of those quizzes have their own results slides. And what you want to do is combine all of those results slide results together into one final result slide. So we're going to have a look at that one. We're going to start with the graded quiz. Now, just as another quick note in here, when we're adding our results slide, we have some legacy results slide, which is sort of an older style of design which Storyline had with previous types of results slides. And also, what Storyline does here as well is it brings up all of our content library designs. So when we're talking about results slide design, Storyline can provide you with a preset design via the content library. Now, the great thing with the content library designs is that everything that you're seeing in there is interchangeable. So you can change out imagery and graphics and other things like that through those designs. So if you're questioning design or your own design skills, I always find a great start point is to look at those content library designs and to pick out ones that really kind of suit your branding or the style of course that you're running. And you can run with those, change out images, change out graphics, change out colors, and so on and so forth. But for us, we're going to start with the graded results slide, just so we can go through, like I said, results slides 101. So when you select your graded results slide, you can insert that slide. It obviously in the background there has added the results slide for me. And by default, what this results slide is doing is it's looking at the quiz questions that are already in this course, and it's adding them into this particular result slide. So all of these questions will contribute to the result. Now, if I didn't want to have any of the questions contributing, pretty easy. I can just take the ticks out of the boxes and then that question won't contribute, but I want all of them to contribute. And then around the rest of this quiz settings pop-up window, we get some additional details around how our results slide is going to work. Up at the top left, we'll just go through these in turn. We have the type of results slide that we're building. Now, I mentioned earlier on when we're looking at the presentation quickly that you can have pre-check and you can also have final assessment. And there is a third type of results slide, which is a knowledge check. So going through each in turn, basically a pre-check, like I said, that's a results slide that is attached to a quiz at the start of your course. And if the learner passes that quiz, then if they close out of the course, they don't have to do anymore because passing the pre-check means they've passed the course. A knowledge check result slide is for a quiz that occurs within the course, but that result slide won't contribute to the pass or fail. And this is going to be talking specifically about the LMS settings, which we'll get into in a second. So any quiz that is set as a knowledge check, you won't be able to select and track that when we come to our LMS settings. And then a final assessment is a results slide that would generally sit at the end of the course, and the learner needs to pass that in order to pass the overall course. Okay. So with these, the pre-check and or the final assessment can be selected, and those will track back to the LMS, and they'll also determine that pass-fail option, okay? And we'll see that in another example. I've got one specifically set up that we'll see after we look at this one. For this one, we're just going to set this basically as a final assessment. We're calculating the questions, we're calculating the result for the questions. I can also set a quiz timer in here as well. So if I select the timer option, what I can do then is select how long this quiz is going to run for, and then also how my timer is going to be displayed to the learner. And what that effectively means is that you can limit the amount of time that the learner has to complete this particular quiz. Okay, I'm not going to use that in this instance, but the option is there. Now, another new feature to Storyline 360 is the fact that you can name your quiz at this point. Okay, now what this is actually going to do is it's going to name the variables. So remember, I mentioned that different variables are created when we add our results slide. By putting a name in here, what it'll do is it'll rename those variables based on the name added. So you can just go in and put in a name. Now, in the naming here, for those of you, if you haven't worked with variables before, there's a couple of little constraints, and that is that variable names can't use spaces or punctuation. You can use an underscore, for instance. If I wanted to put an underscore in the middle, you could go in and do that. But basically what I've just named here is the final result. And then when we go and have a look at our variables shortly, we'll see that it's picked up that name for those variables. So I've got a final assessment. It's calculating results for the questions in my course. Its name is final result, and these are the questions. Then down at the bottom, we have our passing score. So the passing score defaults to 80%. You can change that to be whatever you want it to be, 100%, 50%, wherever you want to go with that. I'm just going to leave this one as 80%. And then we also have the option in here to only score viewed questions in the content. Now, what that will mean is that, say you have a course that has branching throughout it, so the learner follows different pathways, and there are quizzes sprinkled throughout that course. What that will mean is that if the learner goes through a branching pathway, therefore it means they don't see certain slides and potentially don't view certain questions. By selecting this option, it means that they won't be unjustly marked against any questions that they didn't actually see within the content. Okay, so if you have got that sort of feature where the learner might be moving through the course and not seeing all of the questions due to branching or something like that, then you can set it so they don't get scored for questions that they don't look at, which would be a little bit unfair. So we set up all of those details in the background and we click OK, and that saves those details for us and also sets up our results slide. So the results slide, like I said, has a default look and feel, which Storyline has provided for you. We can see that it's made up of a base layer, and in this case, the base layer has just got these little gray boxes. And what we can also see in the base layer is it's referencing some of those variables, passing score as a percent and the passing points. So remember, there was those two variables: pass percent, the percent you need to get to pass; passing points, the points you need to get to pass. Okay. Now also, it's created for us a success and a failure layer automatically. So the success layer, that will be displayed if the learner passes, and the failure layer will be displayed if the learner doesn't pass the course. Going back down to the base layer quickly, if we look over into our triggers area, again, we can see that automatically Storyline has added the triggers to show either one of those layers. And if I open up, for instance, the trigger to show the success layer, it basically says, okay, here's the action. We're going to show that layer when the timeline starts on the slide on the condition that that variable, and you can see it's picked up the name. I called my quiz the final underscore result. So it's named the variable using that name. So if my final result score points, the number of points that I've scored, is greater or equal to the pass points for the same quiz. So if I score the same or more points than I need, then I've passed. Therefore, it'll show me this particular layer. Okay. Now, like I said, the great thing here is that Storyline has done all of that for us. There is a similar trigger to show the failure layer when we land on the same slide if the points weren't enough to pass. And then we also have our submit results. So the submit results trigger is the one that actually does the calculation. It runs through, and it's when the timeline starts on this slide, it runs through and does the calculation of the assessment. Did we pass? Did we fail? When we hit the start of the timeline of this slide. Okay. Now, some of the other things that you'll notice as we're going around our quiz results, and particularly in our success and failure layer, is that we also have some different buttons that Storyline has added for us to the quiz layers in this instance to help inform what the learner can do at this point. So in my pass, I've got a review quiz button, and what the review quiz button does is it takes the learner back to the start of the quiz and lets them literally review or go back and see how they went for each question in the quiz. They won't be able to change anything as they're going back and reviewing the quiz, but they can just see what did they get right, what did they get wrong. Okay. In our failure layer, we've got both the review and then also a retry button as well. So the review does the same thing, sends them back to the start, lets them see what questions they had, how those questions were answered. The retry button sends them back to the start, but it also scrubs out their points and resets the quiz so that the learner can have another go. And effectively, then what the retry button does is if the learner has failed, then they can go back and have another go at the quiz to try and pass a second time around. Okay. Now, within that button itself, and you can see again, Storyline has automatically added the triggers for all of these buttons to work. There is a little hidden feature, which I'll just quickly show you in that retry quiz button too. Now, in the button triggers over on the side, there's two triggers, one trigger that resets the results, a second trigger that jumps me back to the start of the quiz. But in this first trigger, if I go ahead and edit that, there is also a little hidden field that not everyone is aware of, which says to reset only incorrect questions. Now, what that means from the learner's perspective is as they're going through and answering the questions, and so they got only 2 questions wrong the first time around, if we set this and then they go back and retry, they will only have to reattempt the questions, those 2 questions they got wrong the first time around, okay? So it's not on by default, but it's automatically a part of that trigger, the reset results trigger, okay? So you can select that and click OK, and what that's gonna do for your learners, like I said, is if they go and retry, then they only have to go back and redo the questions they got wrong the first time through. Now, that's what Storyline gives us as a default. So it's given us a lot. It's given us our basic design. It's given us different layers that show success or failure. it's referenced into those layers the variables. So in the base layer, the variables that the learner needs to get to actually pass. In the success and failure layers, it's showing what the learner actually achieved. So the variables referenced into the screen here are the actual points that the learner achieved. It's got all of the triggers in place, and it's also added some buttons to help inform how the learner can move through that. Now, all of those different features are controlled via a tab up at the top of this screen, which is a Result Tools Design tab. So if we go into that, we can see where we can add our different variables, passing percent, passing points, user percent, and user points. We can add our different buttons onto the screen, review, retry. There's also a print button here as well. So let's go and see what that does. If we go into our success layer here, I might just move this button over to the side a little bit. I'm going to add in a print button onto the screen. There we go. Now, what the print button does is it will print out a report for the learner of the answers that they made, and then also how they went in the quiz overall as a pass or fail, okay? Now, in this particular instance, my trigger hasn't held here, but basically I need to go and attach the quiz type. And if we were to go and edit that trigger as well, this one also has another little hidden field that not everyone is aware of, and that is a prompt the user for their name. Now, what that little hidden field does is if the learner comes through and clicks on that print results button in the results slide, it'll actually pop up a data entry field for them to enter their name, and then that name will be added to that report for how they went on the quiz, the questions that they answered, as I said, and their final passing score. Okay, so you got that option as well. So Storyline gives you a lot of different options around your results slide to inform how the learner moves through. Back up in our Result Tools Design tab, you can also see up here it controls whether or not the quiz is timed. So that timer can be turned on or off here. Also, the passing score, also the type of assessment. Now, we set all of these things up when we first came in via our quiz settings, but we can also adjust these settings on the fly over time if we wanted to add a timer or change the passing score via this Result Tools Design tab. Okay. Now, also we've mentioned the LMS tracking here as well. So we've set this as the final assessment. If I go into my LMS tracking option here, what this is going to do is take me into the tracking option. And this is something that you see before you publish your course out to a SCORM package or equivalent to go into your learning management system. What you can see in here is that because we've selected the final assessment, our tracking for the course is going to default to this particular final assessment in my content. Okay. Now, to see how that varies, let's have a look at a different example of a quiz, which maybe has a pre and post assessment. So I have another Storyline file here, which basically I've created two quizzes. It's the same quiz, but in the results slides that I've already added to these quizzes, is the results slide at the end of my first scene. If I go into my Result Tools Design, you can see I've set this one up as a pre-check. And if I go into my second scene, the results slide in here has been set up as a final assessment. So I have a pre-check and a final assessment. So if I go into my LMS tracking options now, what I will see is that automatically Storyline has picked up both. Okay. Now, not entirely result slide specific, but just as a general rule of thumb, the way that these tracking options work in terms of passing information back to the LMS, because you can see there's more than one tracking option. We can track off a quiz result, but we can track also off how much of the course the learner has viewed. Or if we had a completion trigger, we could track off that as well. So in your tracking options here, Storyline doesn't track every option that is selected. What it tracks is whichever one of these options that the learner completes first. So if I selected in my tracking options both how much of the course has been viewed and these results slides as a tracking option, and I go ahead and finish and pass the pre-check, then it's going to use that to track back my results to the LMS. If I don't pass that pre-check, but then pass the final assessment, then that's the one that it tracks, okay? And that's how you can have both of those together with the same piece of content, okay? So whichever options you select in here, it's the option that the learner completes first that is the one that tracks the result back, the success result back to the LMS, okay? So let's go quickly back into our other quiz, and we'll just go ahead and preview here, and we'll see how this quiz works at that basic level. So we'll preview again through. So that's going to open up for me. We'll go through, and you'll probably get used to seeing these questions because they're the same questions for all of my different examples here. Continue. We'll get a couple wrong. That one's wrong. We'll get this one right. Okay. Submit. Into my results slide, it's automatically picked up that I didn't pass because my passing score and points, passing percentage, 80%, the points I needed to get 80%, 40. So the calculation is done by the submit trigger in here. Then it's also calculated what I actually achieved, 60%, got 30 points. They're obviously not over the threshold. So I need to go back and redo my quiz again. So let's go ahead and retry. Now, because I selected that option in the background of that trigger, it's only going to make me do the questions I got wrong the first time around. Okay, so it was that one and that one. Option 1 is the answer. And now it's taken me back to that result slide and it's given me my result, 100%, 50 points, which is obviously over and above the thresholds that are required there. So really, there's a lot of description involved in there, but Storyline has done most of the work for us to get the results slide to work. Okay, let's have a look at a slightly different results slide, and that's when we have one of our combined results slides. Okay, so if we switch over, I have my combined results slide here. Now for the combined one, what I have is a course that has 3 different topics in it. Each one of those topics has a quiz, and I've already added the standard results slide to the end of each one of those quizzes. Okay, in this case, that results slide has been set up as a knowledge check, so it doesn't contribute to the final result. And then what I've got over here is a final scene, which is going to contain my last result slide, which will combine the details from these other result slides. So we're going to go into that. We're going to go and add a result slide to that scene. This one's going to be a combined result slide, and then we'll hit insert. It adds the results slide for me, and again, it goes to my quiz settings, but slightly different settings here because we're combining the other results slides together. Okay. Once again, I can select if this is going to be a pre-check, knowledge check, or final assessment. So this is going to, again, be my final assessment. We're calculating the results for the results slide, so the other results slides in my course. I could, if I wanted, select questions in here as well. And in that case, what it'll do is it'll go out and look at all of the questions across my entire course, and I would have to then go and select all of those. But we're looking at a results slide that looks at other results slides. Now, in this case, once we've got that selected, we have our scoring. And we can set the scoring to be that the learner must pass each of the other quizzes in order to pass this final one, or the combined points for all of those quizzes need to exceed a certain threshold. Now, if it's just we're using that the learner must pass the other quizzes, then it's going to create that second set of variables that I mentioned back at the start, which is just counting how many quizzes are in the course, how many quizzes have been passed, how many quizzes have failed or been failed, okay? If you select the combined points, then it introduces a points total down the bottom. And obviously the combined points for all of the quizzes then need to exceed this threshold. I'm going to go with the user must pass each one of the quizzes. Then we need to, again, if we want to, we can just leave it as quiz 4 here, give our quiz a name, which will also name those variables, final combined, I'm going to call this. And then we need to select which result slides throughout my entire course are going to contribute to this final result slide. Okay. So we'll select OK once we've got that in place. Cool. Now you might have just noticed then over on the side here, it's updated by variables. So there's the variables named that have been changed, final combined passed, final combined passed. Okay. This is the extra variable that we were mentioning before as well. So remember we said that when we had a combined results slide, you get the total number of quizzes passed, the number of quizzes failed, and the total number in the course. You also then get a true and false variable. And so you can see here in the trigger that it's that true and false variable that is used to determine whether we see our success or failure layer. So if I've passed every quiz in the course, the variable gets set to true, shows me my success layer. If I haven't passed every quiz, the variable doesn't go to true, therefore I see the failure layer. Now, just like with our other screens, Storyline has given us that success and failure layer as well, with the details and the variables referenced into that too. Okay. So once again, you can see Storyline does all of this work for us in displaying our result slides, and it does most of that automatically. Okay, which is really great. So the last little thing that we wanted to touch on then through the webinar here is just looking a little bit at some design options that you might have, because Storyline does all this stuff automatically. So really what that frees you up to do is to control the design of your results slide to sort of make it a little bit more impactful. Now, design is obviously a little bit of a, what's the word, subjective area. People can sort of like some designs and not like other designs, and I'm not here to tell you specifically which designs would work well and which ones wouldn't. Obviously, your design needs to incorporate a way that the learner can very clearly see the result that has been achieved within the results slide, and also needs to fit in with the theme of your course and the branding that you're using and everything else. So I've created 3 different versions of some results slides that we can look at, just to see quickly how you might achieve some different effects with the results slide. And it's more about the technical, how we get it done, rather than the actual look and feel necessarily. So let's go ahead and have a look at some of those. I'll just go and open some of these up. Now, the first one I'm going to have a quick look at here is, if anyone has used RISE before, you'll know that when you get a RISE quiz at the end, RISE automatically adds a results slide with this nice little graphic of a sort of dot sort of moving around a circumference on the screen. So what I've done is if I go down to my results slide here, basically rebuilt that same concept. So if I go ahead and preview this scene, let's just see how it looks to start with, and then we can talk about quickly how we went about doing that, or went about putting together that particular design. Okay, because there's a couple of different items to note within that. So let's go ahead and I'll just get this one right all the way through. Okay, so you can see same questions. Option 1, continue. Option 1 there, submit. Okay, so when we land on our results slide, what we have is this little dot that moves around this graphic outside. It then also shows me my success layer and what I achieved, or how I was scored percentage-wise in the course. Now, the cool thing here is the way that I've got this set up is that that dot will only transverse a certain amount of this arc based on the score that I've got. Okay, so if I don't get all of the questions right, let's go ahead and do that again, preview the scene. And we'll get a couple of questions wrong this time. So I'll get that one wrong, that one wrong, and we'll get the other ones right. Okay. So what happens now is that when I get onto my results slide, the little dot doesn't go all the way around because I didn't get my passing score. Okay. So let's quickly pull that apart and see how that's working. So the way I've done that is I've basically, this little dotted graphic in the background, that's an image that we just got off Shutterstock. So that's pretty easy and straightforward. What I've done then is I've added a shape, just a circle. That shape has been set up on a motion path, which is a circular motion path that goes all the way around. So it starts here, and what it would actually do if left unfettered, it would come back to its start point. But what I have done then is I've set a series of cue points throughout my timeline here. And then I've set a series of triggers to pause the timeline at each cue point. And you can see within the triggers, based on whether or not the score that I achieved, so the percentage score that I achieved, is greater than or less than a certain amount. So if my percentage score here is, we'll open up that trigger, pause the timeline of the slide. When the timeline reaches cue point number 9, if my score is between, effectively, 80 and 90%, greater than 80%, less than 90%. Okay, Now, for each one of those, there's a trigger for each one of the cue points. So if I've got 10%, it stops at cue point 1, 20%, cue point 2, all the way up to 100% stops at cue point 10, which is the reason why it stops here and doesn't keep on going for the rest of its journey. Now, the only other thing I've had to do then is determine how long the animation needs to last for in order to get the dot to finish here at 100%, which is basically just looking at exactly how much the circumference is and then dividing that up over however many seconds. So in this particular case, if I go back to my animations here, that ended up for me being 6.45 seconds to get the dot from here, okay, all the way around, and then also to pause when those cue points come up, okay? The rest of it is pretty much just straight result slide, success and failure layer, displaying the information. So referencing out our variable for the pass percent, or the score percent, sorry, and a text box message underneath that. Okay, let's have a look at another design then. So in our next design, we've done something a little bit different again. And this is going to be a sort of a progress meter of sorts, okay? But what I wanted to do with my progress meter here is make it active throughout the entire quiz, okay? So if I just go ahead and preview my entire project, because I'm going to need to with this, there's a separate slide out there. What happens here is that as I'm going through and getting questions right, I can look out to see my progress through the course as I'm getting those questions right, okay? So let's go ahead and click on to next. So I'll get this question right. Now, also just as a sub line to this, I've set up these questions so that they've got unlimited attempts, so I can't get through them unless I get all of the questions correct. I can't get past a question until it's right. So I'll get this one right, I'll submit, continue. Now on each subsequent screen, I can check my progress. Checking my progress light boxes me out to this slide, and if I've got the question right, it's changing the state of the graphic to show me how I'm going. Okay, and then I'll close out of that and I'll get this question. Option number 1, check my progress. Okay, I've got that one now. Then this one, 1, 2, and 3. Check my progress again, and you can see that it's advancing as we're moving along. Close out of there. Option 1 is the right answer here. Check my progress. Okay, only one left. Let's finish this thing. Option 1, submit, continue. And it's bringing me into my results slide here, which has all of my little ribbons updated, and it's showing this little overlay. That's my success layer. And for those of you wondering, that's just a GIF image, so an animated image that I put into the success layer just to give that little bit of extra, visual appeal on there. Now, what this is actually doing is if I look into my layer or my results slide here, I have my icons across the screen. Each one of those has a complete state that I've added, okay? And then it's actually in my little light box because I've got a separate light box slide for that. So I've got my different states here. What these are doing is when we go to the light box, which is this slide here, okay, it's changing the state of each one of those icons to complete based on my quiz score. The points I get, if they equal 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50, that's my 5 questions, getting 10 points per question, obviously. So this slide out here, which is my light box slide, is changing the state of each one of those icons as we move through based on the points, the score points that I'm getting in my quiz. So that result slide being there automatically changes the variable in the background as we're accumulating those points. So I can use that same variable from the result slide to change something that's going on a different screen. So if I go back into one of my quiz questions then, once I've created that different screen, I've then got just in my slides, this graphic here and a trigger to lightbox out to this slide, okay? Now, the reason I had to create this as a lightbox is if you just lightbox to the results slide here at the end of the course, what happens is that after 2 or 3 attempts, Storyline locks the course out. It sort of gets confused as to why do you keep on going to the results slide and then bouncing back again. So it created some small problems with that, but that's fine. I created the graphic in here and then I moved it into its own scene, added it to a lightbox, which is the trigger from these slides. And then that obviously displays as we're going through, okay? Now, the final design I wanted to show you is something a little bit different because I wanted to incorporate another really cool Storyline visual feature into a results slide. And so I've gone with a bit of a space theme on this one. So a very different visual theme. Let's go ahead and preview the scene here and see how this goes. So we've used a space theme throughout this one. We'll go through, it's the same questions. We'll get our questions right. Okay, here's my last question. Then it takes me into my results slide. Now, what I've incorporated into this particular results slide is a 360-degree image, which is another great Storyline feature. It's not results slide specific, but I just wanted to use it in a results slide to see how we could go. So what I've done is I've hidden a little marker that the learner can click on, which is around the back of the image, and they need to scroll around through the image to find that marker. So we can scroll around our image. There's our little marker. And when we click on that, it then displays my result. Okay. Which is just, again, a different and visually impactful way of showing a result there. So the way that this one works is that we have our 360-degree image. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the 360 image. That's probably another webinar just by itself. But basically, in that 360-degree image, you can add things like hotspots and markers, which is what I've done. There's my little marker there. And you can see that you can attach triggers to those items. In this case, there's a trigger on my marker. So if I click on it and my score percent is greater than or equal to 80, then it shows me the success layer. If I click on it and my score percent is less than or equal to 80, then it shows me my failure layer back in my results slide. Okay, so just to go through with the failure version, if we just save and close out of that particular thing, we'll preview the scene. Okay, let's go through and get a failure on. And 2. Okay, we'll scroll around to find our little marker. No, so we didn't pass. Let's have another go and we'll get it right this time around. 2 and 3 are the correct options there. Scroll around, find my marker, click, 100% this time around. Okay, so you can see how you can use those different features and functions throughout Storyline to get sort of additional options, viewing options for your learners. Okay. Cool. So that really brings me to the end of the webinar today. It's been great having you guys in with us. This is a recorded webinar, so it's going to be going up onto our website. And if you're interested in any of the other webinars that we have on the website, then please feel free. We're going to be running some more of these webinars looking at other great features and functions of Articulate, the Articulate applications. So keep your eyes open for those, and we hope to see you at some point in the future. Thanks, guys.